No. It's not a word that we're used to hearing. Some of us maybe don't like hearing it. Some of us maybe don't like saying it. But today we're going to be talking about the benefits of learning to say no. There are a lot of them. They can benefit you emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And joining me today is Bob Fair. Bob, thank you. Welcome to Joy in Our Town.
Oh, it's great to be here, Kelly. It's great to be here with you.
This is a topic that people probably don't talk about very often. You know, the importance of learning to say no. Why is this such an issue?
Well, it's important because if we don't learn how to say no, then what happens for us is we pay a big price in our emotional health, physical health. So it can affect us in a lot of ways. So it's a really important thing to pay attention to because it can affect us so significantly. And it's a very common problem. It's a subtle problem. I don't think that people talk about it much. And so you may not be aware that it is even a problem for you if this is something you struggle with. For me, I know this problem very well personally. And so I know how hard it is. And the big struggle with being able to say no, of course, is just is partly because for people who care about other people, you know, we care about how people feel and think, and we don't want to hurt them. We don't want to disappoint them. We don't want them to have to suffer more because now we're saying no to them or we're putting up this boundary, you know. But it's something that we have to figure out, and it's not easy. And maybe in every case, it's tricky, you know. And so, but having kind of working through this personally is really an important step for everyone, I think. And so it's a central question.
Now you mentioned that it's not going to look the same for every person. And a lot of people might not even realize that they have a problem, or that there are things in their life, whether it be stress or maybe fears or dysfunctional relationships, that are a result from not being able to say no. How can a person begin to understand if this is an issue that they struggle with?
Well, I would say right now you can, as you're watching this program, ask yourself, you know, is this me? Do I find that I'm getting upset and annoyed with myself and people because they're pulling on me and I'm saying yes to them when I really shouldn't be, and it's bothering me, and I'm starting to get tired of the things that used to give me joy. That's one of the key symptoms of this, I guess, that you'll notice. And so, you know, I just have the viewers begin to ask themselves, you know, when someone is asking me for something, what's happening inside for me? You know, am I really so quick to say yes to them, I'll do it? And what's going on in me that makes me do that? That may be completely appropriate, but as we're going to talk in a little while, what we want to do is we want to grow a part of us that has to do with self-awareness. And when we have that part growing in us and more of a sense of what our healthy boundaries are for ourselves, then we can kind of figure out in each situation whether we should be saying yes or no.
Especially in ministry, I think with certain types of people, we do tend to be givers. We want to bless people. We want to help people. We want to serve people. But sometimes we're doing that at our own expense, and sometimes we get kind of the impression, perhaps, that you can't say no. It's selfish to say no. It's rude to say no. It's sinful to say no, but that's not the case, is it?
Well, I suppose it's possible, and so the key for me
I should say it's not always the case.
Yeah, not always the case. I would say the key is to actually be able to slow down and try to figure out, okay, so what is appropriate right now? What's a healthy boundary for me? What's an appropriate boundary for me? Is this reasonable? Is this within my limits? And you know, of course, this is going to be personal for everyone, and so, but we have to have this sort of inner dialogue with ourselves and begin to even ask ourselves, are we very quick to be saying yes? And why are we doing that? What are we getting out of that? What's driving that? And usually there are deeper reasons that are driving this that often have to do with trying to avoid feeling something that would be really hard to feel. That a lot of times that's what sits underneath a person saying yes a lot.
So we don't want to face the feeling that saying no would bring up.
Yeah.
So it's just easier.
It's
to
just
say
much
yes.
easier. It's less tension.
Oh, wow.
And so that's what's often driving this.
Can you give us some examples or a scenario in which
Mm-hmm.
these kinds of things are being done by somebody?
Yes, and so one idea that I thought would be helpful is to present a kind of a case study
I love it.
for you of a person who has this issue. And then what I'll do is talk about some practices that this person can do to help the person to kind of grow through this dilemma of yes or no. And so I have lovingly calling this fictional person Martha. And
is that significant? Yeah.
it's a little significant. So this is Martha's story. So I'm a counselor therapist, and Martha's coming into my office because she's completely overwhelmed. She feels like her life is falling apart, and she feels miserable, and she's tired, and she's just recently gotten a breast cancer diagnosis. She's married she's 40. She's married. She has 3 children. Her husband is a salesman. He works long hours. When he comes home, he's very, very tired, and he wants to see her. He wants her to be available to him. But what's happening for her is she's running around with the 3 kids. She's running around with her teenage daughter. The teenage daughter and the next daughter down is yelling and fighting constantly. The son, the youngest son, is never feeling like he's getting enough attention. So she feels as though she's being pulled in many different directions. She's also does things with the school. She does things with her church. She's on 3 different committees, and so she's constantly saying yes to people, constantly feeling as though she needs to be doing for people, to be helping them, to be blessing them in some way. And now what's happening is she's finding that her strategy for helping people is crashing down on top of her head. And she has this physical diagnosis.
Okay.
So she's collapsing. She's collapsing in the chair in front of me. And so in the work with Martha, there will be certain practices that I'll want to kind of roll out for her that she can begin to consider as things that will help her to get out of this storm that she's in. And the first thing that I'll try to present to her as a practice would be what I'm calling the practice of M&M. The first M stands for meet. The second M stands for minister. And so we have a wonderful Psalm 147 where the Lord heals the brokenhearted. He binds up our wounds. And so the idea there is he wants to minister to Martha in that deepest place, that deepest emotional place for her in her soul, deep down, it's hurting so bad and feels like it's crashing down. But Martha has to find time to meet with him so that he can minister to her. I'm sure he will do that, but how much better if she carves out a little bit of space to just sit still and access those things that are going on for her, the hurts or the overwhelmed, and begin to ask him to minister right in that place, right in that emotional place. And so that's, it's difficult to do that, especially for someone like Martha who's running around, but it's key for her to slow down, to find time, maybe each morning, just to begin to tell God about the parts of her that are hurting and just ask him to enter in. So that's the practice of M&M
Okay.
that I'm wanting her to start with. The second thing that I'll try to roll out for her has to do with the practice of kindness to self. Kindness to self.
Okay.
And so in Colossians 3, the Bible talks about clothing yourself with kindness. And one of the things that happens for people, I think, is that we think of this in terms of being kind to others, but we don't tend to think of it in terms of self-kindness.
That's exactly what I would say.
And so what's going to happen with Martha is she's going to be beating herself up because she's letting her husband down. She's, if she says no to this person or that person, she's disappointing them. She's not being a good Christian. She's just not giving enough and constantly feeling that I'm not doing enough. I'm not carrying my cross. I've got to do more. And then when she fails, which she inevitably will, that sense of you've got to do more, and that's not kindness.
No.
That's not kindness. And so what we want to do is we want to be kind to ourselves because there's a story back there. Now, the backstory for Martha is that she was the oldest of 5 kids, and when she was 12, her mother died in childbirth. And so her father was also a salesman and worked many hours. when the mother died, she had to kind of take over being mom to the infant newborn and to her other 3 siblings. And so she kind of lost her own life as a 12-year-old. She had to quickly become mom. And part of what was happening is she was noticing that her dad was coming home constantly sad. He lost his wife. You know, there's nobody there for him now, you know. And, you know, maybe after a couple of years now he's starting to drink. You know, so she's scared. She doesn't, you know, dad is sad. And so she's sort of, what can I do now to sort of make dad feel better? What can I do to make my siblings feel better? I've got to do a better job, you see. So this is where it kind of starts for her. And so to disappoint someone now is to sort of let her father down, to let her siblings down. So she's still kind of in that place. And so what we want to do is we want to be kind to ourselves, because there's a story back there. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere. She is having a hard time saying no because she was cast in a situation that was too hard for her. And she did the best that she could to figure it out. And so that's where the kindness comes in, kindness to self. She may not like that she's overextending herself, but there's a reason why. And so we want to apply kindness to ourselves. Really important practice. And where she's finding that she's getting down on herself in the middle of the day for whatever reason, to go back and remember the kindness, to practice kindness for herself. So
sort of like reprogramming how she's looking at herself and her own identity and why the people around her would value her.
Right.
Because if they're only valuing her for saying yes or for doing things, that's not really valuing her so much.
So that's absolutely right. And that's a tragedy, you know. And so we have to, I guess we have to kind of start with ourselves too, and you know, back with the first practice, and then this practice of giving kindness to ourselves is a way of kind of building that part of us up that's super important, our self. You know, so that's the second practice that I would be trying to talk to her about. The third practice is getting closer to the issue of not saying no, would be the practice of self-awareness.
Okay.
All right. So it's going to be really hard to stop saying yes to everyone and overextending if you don't have self-awareness. You'll just keep doing it. So essentially, self-awareness is the practice of growing in the here and now. What's happening to me right here, right now? What's happening inside? What's my body doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And it may be hard in the moment to do this when somebody asks us something, but generally we want to be growing that part of us, so the awareness of our emotion, the awareness of our kind of reflex behavior, and with kindness to go back and ask ourselves, you know, later, I said yes to this person too fast. Was that going on from back? Am I still back there with my brother and my sisters? Is that what happened for me? And so I don't have to do that again, or I can go back and maybe repair that with the person a little bit. And so that self-awareness piece is really huge.
Do you ever recommend that people maybe say, you know what, I have to get back to you, if they're not yet at that place where they're fully aware in that moment and they're still saying yes, is a reflex you mentioned, you know, because that at least gives them a little bit of time to step back and say, wait a minute, like, how do I really feel about this? Because sometimes people say yes just automatically, and then they go later, they can process when they have that time, like for reflection, like you said.
Right. And so I love this question.
Good.
This is really good. We have to be able to do that. We have to be able to slow down and say, hold on, I need to maybe find, if that's the you know, however you want to say it to the person, but the way you said it was beautiful, but you know, hold on, you can get back to the person. This is an example of a healthy boundary to me, and that's the fourth practice.
Okay.
So you've led me right into that.
Healthy
Thanks,
boundary.
Kelly.
All right, let's talk about
healthy
boundaries.
boundary. And so what is a healthy boundary? And a healthy boundary has, for me, has the following characteristics. It's appropriate. Okay. It's reasonable. You know, it takes into consideration my own limitations as a person. And maybe it includes higher principles, you know. So maybe I need to give some examples of what I mean by this to help you. And so what's an appropriate boundary look like? And so for me, as a therapist, an appropriate boundary for me is I don't generally touch there's no touch in the therapy
Okay.
sessions, you know. So any kind of touch that would be not therapeutic would be an example of an inappropriate boundary
Okay.
crossing.
So they're crossing the
So
line.
the
Okay.
client is really being mistreated by me doing that. So that's an example of an appropriate boundary. An appropriate example of a reasonable boundary would be something like the person from church asks me to maybe help on some project, and maybe I can this week, maybe I can help them for an hour, but I can't help them for 100 hours.
Okay.
You see?
Okay.
So that's a reasonable 1 hour. Yes, I think I can do that. That's reasonable after they've, I've considered what I cannot and cannot do, and what's reasonable for me, and so, and to know my limitations. So again, I don't want to, if I know my limitations and I know my energy level, I'm not going to then commit to 100 hours to help, the church,
Okay.
though I would love
Okay.
to. But I know myself and I know that I don't have that energy, and that's okay. To be reasonable.
So saying no in that context isn't actually because you don't have the heart to serve or because you don't want to help, but it's because you're really looking at the situation and saying, no, this would be a bad thing for me. And that's not selfish.
Not selfish. And I think this is also excellent. I love that you're asking me this, because I think for believers especially, we're going to struggle with, is this selfish?
Yeah.
Because it sure is going to feel that way. It
Yes.
will feel that way. But here's where the fourth point that I was bringing up helps, which is is there a higher principle? And so there are higher principles to things. And so, a higher principle would be something like, if I do all of this and I get, physically sick doing this, burn out, is that really good for everyone or for me? And so, the higher principle is, I think, maybe in this case, it would be something like, I do need to make sure that I'm healthy first so that I can come and serve well, and maybe another higher principle would be something like, it's more. Here's an example that I thought of. Let's go back to Martha for a second. Now, she's coming in and now she's sobbing because the youth pastor asked if she would be available to cook a potluck supper for Sunday for the youth group. And he, of course, has no idea of any of this going on. And she, of course, said yes right away because she wants to please him. She wants him to give, the daughter good care who's in his youth group. And so she says yes so fast, super fast. But then she realizes, that is my 20th wedding anniversary.
Oh.
Oh no, what do I do now? If I go back and tell the youth pastor I can't do it, I let the person down. And maybe he'll look down on me, and maybe he'll look down on my daughter. He won't help as much, and she needs a lot of help, right? But if I do the potluck, and go with my husband, I'm honoring him, but I'm letting her down. If I say to my husband, you know what, it's just a potluck thing, we can go out tomorrow night for dinner, I know it's the next night, but, honey, would that be okay? We're really disappointing him. What's the higher principle there? And I would say that the marriage is the higher principle. For me, the marriage is, God, then the marriage, then children, and then everyone else. And so what I'm wanting Mary to do is actually accept the disappointment she's going to create with the youth pastor and say no to him, and go back and say no to him, and honor the special day for her and for her husband. And so that's the idea of a higher principle.
Okay. As people who are maybe, say I was that youth leader, is there a strategy that people can employ so that we can create more of a friendly environment for people to change their minds and to say no and to be in that situation and provide grace for them in that situation? Because sometimes that's not there either.
No, that's not there. And so, I was a youth pastor myself for a
Okay.
while. So I know this. I know this struggle. The youth pastor's dilemma is interesting because often they are doing everything themselves and they don't have enough help. And so when Martha says no, he's devastated because now what? And crushing blow. But it's important for the youth pastor to recognize that he cannot push people to make unhealthy choices.
That doesn't benefit anybody.
It's not going to benefit anybody. And certainly what the youth pastor could grow in is the ability to delegate. So he's got to build up his leadership.
Okay.
And spend time praying and working on the leadership piece, because it's getting thin, And so, but it's very, very important for people in power, people in leadership, to not be pushing our people who want to say yes lovingly, but they can't, to be pushing them, backing them into a corner where they have no choice, and they overcommit and they say yes at the detriment of themselves and their family. And actually, this is, for me, maybe this is too strong of a thing to say, but I think it's emotionally abusive to do that.
Well, I think those are the kinds of situations where people do end up getting emotionally hurt, and then they maybe decide they don't want to be involved with this volunteer opportunity anymore, and they completely withdraw. So yeah, it does seem like that could be a form of abuse.
Yes, and that's certainly what we don't want. And for that,
Right.
Martha to have a bad experience helping. If she's told by the youth pastor, I'm sorry, you said yes, and what am I going to do? Like, you have to do something. No, she doesn't, actually.
Right, okay. And that's probably hard for a lot of people to admit, that no, we don't actually have to do something. It really should be coming from a place of, this is something that you care about doing. This is something that you want to do.
And you can do.
You can.
And it's reasonable.
And it's not always going to be necessarily fun. I mean, sometimes we're going to have to do things that aren't maybe easy for us, but they're not causing us disease.
Right. And so that's the tricky, walk for us is in trying to figuring that out. And so the next practice that I would be wanting Martha to consider is this practice of being able to live in the tension of the emotion. Live in the tension of the emotion.
Okay,
Right.
that's
so this
heavy.
is a big one. And so what this looks like for her is, she now is in a bind because she said yes to the youth pastor. It's her, wedding anniversary on Sunday. She's in a bind. And that bind is going to create a mess inside for her. Because now she's back there. She's way back there in that bind as a child. We'll relive that. And it's going to be a horrible feeling. How does she live in the tension created by that, all of those emotions? And this is where the first practice comes in. This is where the first practice, which is where she then ask the Lord to minister into that emotional tension in that moment when that's coming up. And He will. When we go in and we access the emotion, when we share it with a spouse or a loved one and with the Lord, it actually softens the emotion. So this is how we treat emotion.
Does it help? When you're counseling people, when they begin to understand that it's okay for them to feel the pressure, to feel like they have to do something, that they're not alone in feeling that, and that they don't necessarily have to give into that. When they know that they're not alone, when they know that this is something that they're going to encounter, does that make it easier for them to then access that emotion?
Yes, that's exactly what happens. And and I call this a practice because you have to practice what you just said. It's not easy. And so for me, it's almost like a daily, doing just that, of going inside of me, what's happening to me emotionally. Is there, a bind for me? Can I feel that? Lord, can you come into that with me? I'm not alone now, of course, when I do that. Can you minister to me in that bind? And He does. And what happens is, when we do this, the key is that it validates the emotion that's in there, the emotional struggle. When I feel it, and then it softens, and then it makes it easier for me to then do that in the future, because I'm finding that it actually really helps, and it will help. It absolutely will help if you do this. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to deflect from feeling. We want to feel whatever it is. We want to go in and feel it, no matter how awful it is, because it will actually soften it. And we want to feel it so that we can tell the Lord about it, because He'll enter into that with us. And it actually builds the bond with Him.
And are those feelings always, I mean, you're feeling it, but it could be that you're feeling condemned when that's really a lie that you're telling yourself. So it's not necessary. So sometimes confronting it might be exposing it, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, I've been acting and reacting under maybe a false impression of myself and my identity, or why I need to be doing these things.
Yeah, and the tricky thing is, if we have that going on and we try to sort of think our way out of that, or actually throw good, awesome scripture at it, so a lot of times it'll bounce off. Because I think what happens is we have to attend to the emotional place first.
Okay.
Because we have to validate that we're suffering in that condemnation. Even though we know there is therefore now no condemnation, we're still emotionally going to be feeling that. So we still want to feel that with the Lord and bring Him in, and then we can kind of receive the truth that we want to live in, which is therefore there is now no condemnation.
Okay.
So I'm wanting people to not bypass the feeling part to go after the truth. I want them to pay attention to their emotional parts and stay grounded in the truth, both.
Okay. I see. I get that.
And those are the practices that will help Martha to kind of grow in her awareness and to help her to be able to, she'll find herself having more of a sense of self and being able to make better, healthy boundary choices for herself.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you ever make recommendations for people? Because sometimes you'll say no and people don't hear your no. So is there a step, once people get comfortable in saying no, how do they then deal with those kinds of relationships? Sometimes it's family because there's that familiarity, and so people aren't really good at respecting your boundaries. What does a person do?
Yeah, and so a conversation has to happen with the person that you're having the tension with. It's really important to be able to share your own struggle with the no. And actually what's going to happen is, as long as it's not done in an accusatory way, that person will actually get it. And it has a potential to actually grow the bond tighter between you and the person, the loved one. And so this is the very thing that I would be wanting Martha to do if this is her situation, is actually to approach the person, approach the youth pastor, actually talk about what's going on inside and how hard it is for her. And to validate it might also be hard for him. And they get close together.
And those are the things I think we probably shy away from. Those are the things that we're afraid to reveal in maybe saying no as a weakness. But you're saying that that's really what's going to make it stronger.
That's what's going to be stronger. And so we get healthier the more we can access the deeper parts of us. And the more that we can feel it in the Lord's presence and the more we can share it with others, that helps us to grow in being healthy. And we can, that's
Bob,
what that is.
We're all out of time for today, but thank you for giving us that example and then walking us through the steps, because I feel like that practical information is going to help. I know it helped me. I know this is something that is an issue for me, so I'm sure a lot of other people were blessed by it too.
Glad to help.
If you want more information, check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/WGTW48. And we will see you next time on Joy in Our Town.